Hello, I'm Louisa Pilbeam. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, Europe has outpaced the US in military support to Ukraine, while Donald Trump wants to lead in diplomacy and put an end to Russia's war. Who ends up calling the shots and at what cost? It was meant to fix Nigeria's economy, but currency devaluation as part of wider reforms is hurting manufacturers. We look at how factories are trying to keep their business afloat. Going on holiday to take a snooze, the trend known as sleep tourism is on the rise. But why? And who's profiting from people's dreams? Europe is now pledging more military aid to Ukraine than the US. That's according to the Germany-based think tank, the Kyiv Institute, while Washington is negotiating the nation's future. President Donald Trump has held talks with the Russian and Ukrainian presidents in a bid to end Moscow's war. But there's still a great deal of uncertainty. If no peace deal is reached, American support to Kyiv could shrink further, pushing even more of the financial burden on Europe. But sustaining the flow of that money is a challenge to many European governments whose economies are under pressure. If a deal is struck, the question shifts from who gives more aid to who will pay for rebuilding what's left. We will discuss all of that with our guest shortly. But first, Katia Lopez-Horayan reports.
Wars are expensive. That's why money and military investments were top issues in the recent meeting between Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Washington has backed Kyiv since Russia's invasion in 2022, allocating more than $130 billion in aid. But now, a shift. Europe is ramping up its financial support while the U.S. is scaling back, focusing instead on sales.
We're not giving anything now, we're selling weapons. We sell the equipment to NATO, and NATO does what, I don't know what the arrangement is that you have with, but I know that they want you to have the equipment. And we're getting the best equipment in the world, but they pay us for the equipment.
Ceasefire talks include plans for Ukraine to buy tens of billions of dollars of American weapons paid for by Europe in exchange for security guarantees from the U.S.
There is a package of weapons, U.S. weapons that we don't have, which primarily includes aircraft and air defense systems. There indeed is a package with our proposals worth $90 billion.
Europe's support for Ukraine is in full display. A new report shows its military aid to Kyiv reached more than $12 billion in the months of May and June. With or without a deal, the talks mark a significant shift in tone and in budgets. Europe has poured more money into its defense during Trump's administration. European leaders say they can't afford to ignore Russia or the potential risk of Moscow eventually targeting land in Europe.
You have
an American president, European presidents, and a Ukrainian president all wanting peace. I have serious doubts Putin wants peace, because as long as he thinks he can win through war, he will do so.
Russia appears defiant. U.S. threats to impose additional sanctions on Moscow have so far landed flat.
It's notable, of course, that Putin dangled the prospect of enhanced trade relations. Obviously, that would be in return for dropping sanctions. But of course, that is something still that's really quite unpopular in the United States.
Ukraine says redrawing maps and ceding land to Russia is a deal breaker. But whatever the outcome, the war has already changed the political landscape and expenses of all parties involved. Katia Lopez-Horayan, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Well, let's take a closer look at some of the numbers. So far, the United States has been Ukraine's largest single donor with more than $130 billion. That includes a combination of military, financial and humanitarian assistance since 2022 until the end of June this year. Europe collectively, however, has spent more. Figures from the Kyiv Institute show the continent as a whole spent almost $166 billion over the same period. The UK is high on the donors list. It ranks among Europe's top backers with more than $19 billion allocated to Ukraine. It's followed by Germany with nearly $16 billion given to Kyiv as of April. France and Poland are also on the list. They have respectively given about $5 billion each. Mustafa Rahman is Europe Managing Director for the Eurasia Group. He's also a Senior Research Fellow at the London School of Economics, and he joins us from London. Good to have you with us. So the latest report by the Kyiv Institute then shows European military aid to Ukraine has overtaken American output for the first time since Russia's invasion. Why this shift then?
I think the Trump administration has been absolutely clear that the Russia-Ukraine conflict is a European security problem, and it is for Europe to take the lead in not only resolving the conflict, but supporting Ukraine militarily, financially, diplomatically, politically, and that the US wants to extricate itself from this conflict. And so the shift in the numbers, I don't think, is a surprise. The expectation has been for quite some time that when the Biden era aid would be drawn down, it would be for the European Union and the member states to fill in the gap.
OK, so the US distancing themselves then financially from this. But as Trump floats a peace deal with Putin and then Zelensky engages with Washington, who has more political leverage? Europe, which is now paying more, or the US?
So I think the financial support for Europe is actually the easier part of the problem to solve for. There are already a number of facilities that the Europeans are using to funnel money to Ukraine, whether that's bilateral aid, as your earlier graphic showed, from individual member states. The European Union is leveraging its budget. It has created a facility that runs through the end of 2027 to provide financing not only to Ukraine militarily, but also to provide budgetary support to the administration. The European Union, alongside the Americans, are using the frozen assets in European clearinghouses, the interest that's generated from those frozen assets to finance and support Ukraine. The bigger problem, I think, for Europe is on the military side, where they really need American support to create a deterrent that will prevent future Russian aggression, effectively a big stick in the cupboard that the US administration can wave at Putin to make clear to him that in the event of a future invasion, there will be catastrophic consequences for Russia. That is wrapped up in this debate about a guarantee to protect Ukraine in the future. And that's really now where a lot of the diplomatic activity is focused, and where Europe is really more dependent on America to make sure that guarantee is credible. So on the financial part, on the fiscal part, I actually think the political problem for Europe is more straightforward. But on the military side, on the guarantee side, that is where Europe is more dependent on America.
So with Europe facing its own economic challenges then, Germany and France, for example, with sluggish economies, can they afford to keep aiding Ukraine?
I think politically, support for Ukraine remains an absolute priority, both at the European and the national level. And actually, if you look at the amounts of money that Ukraine requires in terms of both military support, but also budgetary support for the government as a share of GDP for individual European countries, or as a share of European GDP, the numbers are actually quite small. And so I don't think there's an economic problem or an economic constraint for Europe in supporting Ukraine financially. The European nations are now in the process of negotiating their new 7-year budget. There are plans in the context of that budget to create a facility that will enable the EU to support Ukraine long term. So I don't think there's an economic constraint there. As I said, the bigger constraint is the military one. It's what Europe can do in the short term to backstop and support Ukraine and prevent Russian aggression, where I think the challenges are more acute. And that is why the Europeans are very focused now on developing their own defence and technological and industrial base to make sure that over time they will be able to procure and develop the weapons Ukraine needs and the Europeans need to protect themselves against Russia with less American support. But in the short term, there is more dependence on those questions.
With people living in Europe, though, and Europe spending more money now on military aid, these people will want to know, where is this money coming from and can they justify spending it in the future?
You're correct. And I think that is a discussion that leaders all across Europe now are beginning to lean into with their electorates. For some countries, that debate is more straightforward because the economies are in slightly better shape or they have more fiscal space, the debt levels are less elevated. Germany is a very good example of a country that has the fiscal space to surge on defence, and so the political constraints around the government, the Grand Coalition in Germany doing that, are perhaps less problematic. But if you look at a country like France, where there is a minority government, a government that has around 210 MPs and a parliament of 577, with no real prospect of being able to pass a budget for the next fiscal year, selling the idea that you need to spend more on defence at the expense of other public goods like welfare is not straightforward. But it is a conversation that I think European countries are leaning into because very explicit commitments have now been made in the context of the NATO agreement at the end of June.
And of course, at the moment, what is being discussed is a peace deal, potentially. Would that reduce the financial burden on Europe? Would there then be more costs going forward for reconstruction, for example, in Ukraine?
No, I suspect the reconstruction costs will be in addition to the desire of European countries to make sure they are in a position, even in a time of peace, over the medium and longer term, to be able to deter Russian aggression. I mean, there is a hegemon on Europe's border spending 7 to 8% of its national income on its military. That is a long-term strategic threat to the security of the continent. And I think that is a challenge and a risk that is keenly and widely shared across all leaders on the continent and indeed, as I say, the European institutions.
OK, Mustafa Rahman, we appreciate your analysis. Thank you. With oil wealth, Nigeria should be oversupplied with foreign currency, but years of mismanagement has led to a shortage of dollars. To fix the problem, President Bola Tinubu has lifted foreign exchange controls and allowed the naira to float freely and weaken against the greenback as part of his broader economic reforms. The devaluation was aimed at reviving growth and attracting foreign investors to Africa's most populous nation. But the measure has hurt manufacturers, with many factories forced to shut down as costs climbed and dollars to pay for imports dwindled. But many manufacturers are now turning to domestic sourcing to keep their business afloat. The use of local raw materials increased to an average of almost 58% last year. That's according to the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria. More than 800 manufacturing companies shut down because of the economic conditions in 2023. Many international companies, including Procter & Gamble and Unilever, have pulled back from the country in recent years. Joining us from Abuja is Paul Alaje, Chief Economist at SPM Professionals, a Nigerian economic consulting firm. Thank you for being with us, Paul. So with so many factories out of business and struggling to import materials, is currency devaluation doing more harm than good?
Thank you so very much for having me. Currency devaluation in Nigeria has both sides. With the devaluation of currency, we've seen that we have seen some relative stability in the economy, which includes exchange rates remaining around 1,500 to 1,550, sometimes 1,600. But what that has left us with is weaker purchasing power, as some factories, foreign factories, are left Nigeria, including Procter and Gamble. We have also seen that Nigerian manufacturers have found it really very tough to import commodities into Nigeria, I mean raw materials into Nigeria. So people's purchasing power have reduced significantly, and manufacturers have concerns. In fact, report has it that between 770 companies have shut down, and Manufacturer of Nigeria says about 300 other companies are seriously struggling between 2023 and 2024.
If factories are now increasingly sourcing material domestically, will that help them stay in business? And what key materials are not available domestically?
Clearly, factories are looking inward for alternatives, but you know that it is not all materials that come from farm that can be readily used in the factory. We have semi-finished products which factories can use, most of which are not currently available in Nigeria. And in the presentation I did for Manufacturing Association of Nigeria in Abuja last month, after conversation with them, they revealed that to a large extent they have issues with semi-finished products which are not in Nigeria. What we have are farm output or produces that we still need to convert to what factories can use. So looking in what is important, perhaps government may want to support those who will help us process those useful raw materials in the factory. But as I speak to you today, that is a major need that most factories in Nigeria needs beyond importing finished products into the country.
Consumers will want to know, of course, if prices are going to go up, and will they be able to get the products that they want?
We have choices. Economics is a study of choices. As the price goes up, consumers will have to either reduce what they consume or look for more money to buy what the price is. Both locally produced commodities and those that are imported have all increased in price. And inflation have continued to tell us that inflation has remained double digits in the last 10 years in Nigeria. Only recently, it reduced to 20.1%. So clearly speaking, consumer will have to make choices, especially families. We have to make choices as to what is essential to consume until we overcome the current economic quagmire.
Paul Alaje joining us from Abuja. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
After years of devastating conflict, Syria is taking steps to rebuild its shattered economy. There are plans for new infrastructure, new businesses and new technology. But there remain challenges ahead, particularly with sanctions and stability. Despite that, Syria's new government has secured investment deals. The Syrian diaspora is also getting involved in its own way with initiatives to bring the high-tech era into the nation. Kulsum Sharif reports.
Syria is at an economic crossroads. Years of civil war and mismanagement has devastated its economy, and now it's looking to rebuild it. Since its political transition, Syria has been facing a severe liquidity crisis, with a shortage of banknotes and disruptions in currency circulation.
If Syria grows at the average of 1.3 GDP growth rate of the past 5 years, it will need 55 years to go back to 2010 GDP.
Now there's a push to revamp the country's finances. A new government is looking for new business deals with regional neighbors. While meeting in Jordan's capital with his counterpart, Syria's foreign minister signed 12 agreements worth $14 billion, including deals with Qatar and the UAE for a new airport, subway and national investments. The Syrian diaspora also wants to play a role in rebuilding the country and its technology. A new initiative called SYNC looks to bring Silicon Valley innovations into post-war Syria. Organized by the diaspora, the conference in Damascus also attracted a number of cabinet members.
When we are talking about SYNC, it's a movement. It's a movement how we are going to bridge the gap between Syrians in Syria and Syrians outside, and how we are going to kind of help Syrians here in technology in order to create 25,000 job opportunities, as you know, in 5 years' time, and at the same time helping Syrians in upskilling and capability build.
For years, Syria's long history of sanctions under the Bashar al-Assad regime hurt its chances for technological advancement. Many say now there's an opportunity for financial growth, with foreign investors looking into the Syrian market.
The technical skills and the agility that people have shown, the resilience that people have adapted to a very difficult situation, now they're putting that together, so both the technical skills and the agility, and almost like an explosive mix.
Lifting Syria's infrastructure will require hundreds of billions of dollars, with the country now looking to rebuild not only its economy, but also its future. Kulsum Sharif, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Now, it was worth more than $690 billion in 2024. The sleep tourism industry is booming. In a world where burnout and sleepless nights are all too common, travellers are increasingly booking trips, not for the sights, but for a good snooze. The travel industry has spotted a lucrative opportunity, turning rest into big business. From wellness retreats to five-star hotels, businesses are rolling out specialised sleep packages that could cost up to thousands of dollars. That goes beyond plush pillows and blackout curtains. The programmes include medical-led retreats, diagnosing sleep disorders, relaxation rituals and tech-driven comfort. The sector is part of the broader wellness tourism industry, which is estimated at more than $800 billion globally. Joining us from Adelaide in Australia is Dean Miller. He's a sleep scientist and senior lecturer at Central Queensland University. So thank you for being with us today. Checking yourself in to a lovely hotel to sleep with a pillow menu, for example. It all sounds rather appealing to most of us today. Is this kind of thing scientifically proven, or is it clever marketing?
A lot of the trends we see in sleep tourism are following the trends that we see in science and can be easily implemented at home. So the sleep tourism attractions may be related to sleep tech, may be related to preparing the sleep environment for optimal sleep. We can do that on holiday, but we can also do that at home, and that's the takeaway point, I think.
Let's look at the economy in terms of this. Is sleep increasingly becoming a product?
Yes, and particularly inadequate sleep. So inadequate sleep costs us, or in Australia at least, $45 billion each year, whether it's directly or indirectly. Shift workers and everyday people are struggling to get that adequate 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And because of that, there's an increased interest in sleep health. People are buying devices to, one, track their sleep, potentially improve their sleep, and there's a multitude of products in the market that can help us improve our sleep practices generally, and that's what sleep tourism is kind of jumping on the back of as well.
And how will businesses be looking at this? Because how much does lack of sleep affect productivity and then, of course, the overall economy?
Inadequate sleep can have a massive impact on productivity. We know that inadequate sleep impacts our cognitive performance, it affects our mood. So if we're not getting that good sleep, we're not performing optimally. And what we do know is the only way to improve that is to get that adequate sleep. And putting in place safeguards, which are consistent sleep times, aiming for that 7 to 9 hours each night, and creating a sleep-friendly environment in the bedroom, keeping the lights nice and dim at night in the lead into bed, and really prioritising that bedtime routine.
Now, as I mentioned, this does sound wonderful, but could people be misled into treatments and stays and this kind of thing, you know, when they don't actually help?
Yeah, absolutely. In some cases, it may be a Band-Aid solution for some people. And if you have the means, by all means, go on holiday and prioritise your sleep, get good sleep through sleep tourism. But potentially it is a Band-Aid, and when you return back home and return to your busy schedules and don't implement the learnings that you may have had through these experiences, then it's just going to go back to the norm, and you're going to have that inadequate sleep effect. So investing in your sleep doesn't necessarily have to be monetary.
Okay, it seems like it is rather appealing. Dean Miller, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And horror films are at a record high in shares of the US box office. Weapons opened with $42.5 million in US movie theatres, while Sinners had become the highest grossing original movie of the 2020s. This year, scary movies account for 17% of the North American ticket purchases, up from 11% just last year and only 4% a decade ago. We spoke earlier with Ashanti Omkar, a film, television and culture critic, and asked her why horror movies are on the rise.
Well, with horror cinema, it's become such a popular genre these days because it fits that date night movie. People like to go and see these films where they're in a safe space, but they're taken into an environment, into an immersive experience somewhat that takes them into a different space in their lives. So basically what you experience in day-to-day life could feel a little bit mundane. You're doing the same sort of things every day. When you go into a horror movie, it takes you away to a completely different world. And that's something that people seem to really love. It is definitely cheaper to produce. A lot of the time, if you look at the box office of these movies and you see how much they're making, and then you look at the budget for the movie and you think, wow, I can't believe this, because very rarely do you get big Hollywood stars doing these movies. We saw something like Interview with a Vampire with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, but it's very rare to see those kind of big names jumping into these films. So they're definitely low risk for the distributors and for the producers. And also they are easier to make in the sense that they're often set in one setting. For example, it could be a house. Everyone is trapped in that house. These are the scenarios that they create with these films. So it's more practical effects. It's easier to do. They're using less technicians to actually create the movie, as well as using talents that are not so well known who go on to become much bigger after they've done horror movies. So if you just look at the box office of a new movie called Weapons, it's a horror movie that's come out, or a movie like Sinners that came out early on this year, you can see that people are flocking to cinemas because with a horror movie, it's a very communal experience. You want to experience those jumps, those scares, those screams with other people. And it makes for one of those big moments for you to say, I'm going to spend my money going to the cinema and watching a film like this just because I want to experience it with other people. It's something I don't get to do at home, where there might be at maximum a few friends or family who are sitting here watching this with me. Doing it with a whole cinema of people makes all the difference to the experience.
Well, that is our show for this week. Do get in touch with us on X. I'm at Louisa Pilbeam at TV, and use the hashtag AJCTC when you do that. Or drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is our address. But there's more for you online, of course, at aljazeera.com/CTC. That will take you straight to our page, which has individual reports, links and entire episodes for you to catch up on. That is it for this edition of Counting the Costs. I'm Louisa Pilbeam from the whole team. Thank you for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is up next.